The ground shook under Captain Lee Daeho's boots as another explosion lit up the dark sky. Orange flames painted the colony buildings in ugly shadows. Above them, alien warships hung like black metal clouds, raining death on everything below. "Move faster," Daeho shouted into his radio. "We have 10 minutes before the last transport leaves." His soldiers ran through the empty streets, checking every building one more time. The human colony on Kepler 442b was dying. The Vorthak Empire had come to claim this world, and they did not leave survivors. Everyone knew the stories. When the Vorthak finished with a planet, nothing lived there anymore. Daeho's helmet display showed red dots moving toward their position. Enemy ground troops were getting closer. He had been a soldier for 15 years, and he had seen many battles. But this was different. This was not a fight they could win. This was just trying to save as many people as possible before the end came. The colony had been home to 3,000 humans and about 500 aliens from other worlds. Most were from the Nari species. They looked almost human, but taller and thinner. Their skin was light blue and their eyes were large and silver like mirrors. The Nari had no weapons and no armies. They were peaceful people who had come to this world looking for safety from other wars. Now safety was gone. The transport ships could only carry so many people. "Hard choices had to be made, Captain." Sergeant Nam Junho's voice crackled through the radio. "I found something in Sector 7. You need to see this." Daeho ran toward the voice, jumping over pieces of broken buildings. Sector 7 had been hit hard. Most of the houses were just piles of stone and metal now. Smoke made it hard to see, and the air tasted like fire and death. He found Junho standing outside what used to be a small house. Half of it had fallen down, but the other half was still standing. Through a hole in the wall, Daeho could see movement inside. "There's someone alive in there," Junho said. "But the building is not safe. It could fall down any minute." Daeho did not think twice. He squeezed through the hole in the wall. Inside, the ceiling had big cracks and pieces of it had already fallen to the floor. In the corner, he saw a man sitting against the wall. The man was bleeding from his head and his leg was trapped under a heavy piece of metal. It was Park Jin-woo, one of the colonists who worked at the medical center. Jin-woo was holding something against his chest, protecting it with his body. "Jin-woo," Daeho called out, moving carefully around the broken pieces of the house. The injured man looked up. His face was pale and his breathing was slow and difficult. "Captain, I was hoping someone would come." Then Daeho saw what Jin-woo was protecting. It was a small child, no more than 2 years old. She was Nari, with the typical blue skin and silver eyes. But she was so young, so small. Her large eyes looked at Daeho with no fear, only curiosity. "This is Kira," Jin-woo said, his voice getting weaker. "Her family was killed in the first attack. I found her crying in the ruins of their house. I could not leave her." The building shook again as another bomb exploded somewhere nearby. Dust fell from the ceiling and the cracks got bigger. "We need to go now," Daeho said. He tried to lift the metal piece that trapped Jin-woo's leg, but it was too heavy and too twisted. Jin-woo knew what this meant. He looked down at the little girl in his arms, then back at Daeho. "Take her, please. She does not deserve to die here." "I can get you both out," Daeho said. But even as he said it, he knew it was not true. The building was falling apart and they had no time. "No," Jin-woo said firmly. He lifted the child toward Daeho. "Take Kira, save her." "That is an order from a dying man." The little girl did not understand what was happening. She reached out to Daeho with tiny hands, making soft sounds that might have been words in her own language. When Daeho took her, she felt so light, like she was made of air. "I will take care of her," Daeho promised. Jin-woo smiled even though he was in great pain. "She is smart. She learns fast. Her parents were good people. They would want her to live." Daeho turned to leave, but Jin-woo called out one more time. "Captain, tell her about them someday. Tell her that her parents loved her." Daeho nodded and ran toward the hole in the wall. Behind him, he heard the ceiling start to fall. He did not look back. Outside, Junho was waiting. "The transport is leaving in 3 minutes," he shouted. They ran through the burning streets, Daeho holding the child close to his chest. She was quiet now, but her silver eyes were wide, taking in everything around them. The smell of smoke, the sound of explosions, the orange light of fire painting everything in the color of fear. The transport ship was already lifting off the ground when they reached it. Daeho jumped and grabbed the loading ramp just as it started to close. Strong hands pulled him inside and the ship rose into the dark sky. As they climbed higher, Deho moved to one of the small windows. The colony was burning below them. Orange spots of fire scattered across the darkness like angry stars. Soon, Vorthak's ships would finish their work and nothing would be left. The little girl in his arms pressed her face to the window. She was too young to understand what she was seeing, but somehow she seemed to know that the lights below were not celebration fires. They were goodbye fires. The death of her world. Kira's silver eyes reflected the flames below. In them, Deho saw something that made his chest feel tight and his throat close up. He saw sadness. Not the simple sadness of a child who had lost a toy, but something deeper, something that no child should ever have to carry. She looked up at him then, and their eyes met. In that moment, Deho felt something break inside his heart. This small being, this innocent life, had lost everything. Her parents, her home, her world. And now she was looking at him with eyes that asked a question he could not answer. Why did this happen? The transport ship jumped into hyperspace, carrying them away from the dying world. But the image of Kira's face at the window, watching her world burn, would stay with Deho forever. 3 months had passed since the evacuation from Kepler 442b. The refugee fleet moved through space like a wounded animal, slow and desperate. Food was running low. Water recyclers worked day and night just to keep everyone alive. Medicine was almost gone. Captain Lee Deho walked through the corridors of the UES Resilience, the largest ship in the fleet. Everywhere he looked, he saw tired faces and worried eyes. Humans and aliens lived together in spaces that were too small, eating meals that were too little. Everyone was trying to be brave, but fear was like a smell in the air that would not go away. The ship's intercom crackled to life. All senior officers report to Conference Room A immediately. It was Admiral Kim Sora's voice, and she sounded tired. Deho made his way to the meeting, passing through the refugee sections. The aliens lived in converted cargo holds, families separated by hanging sheets and broken dreams. He had walked this path many times in the past 3 months, usually looking for one person in particular. He found her in Section C, playing with some metal pieces that someone had shaped into toys. Kira had grown in these 3 months, but she was still so small. Her blue skin was paler than it should be, and her silver eyes seemed too big for her thin face. She was living with Bora and Tai-Min, a Nari couple who had lost their own children in the attack. They were good to her, but Deho could see the sadness in their eyes when they looked at her. She reminded them of what they had lost. Kira looked up when she saw Deho coming. She always recognized him, even in his uniform with his helmet off. Nari had perfect memory, Dr. Yoon Haijin had explained. They never forgot a face, never forgot a kindness, never forgot a hurt. Hero man, she said in her small voice. That was what she called him. She had learned some human words, but she still mixed them with her own language. Deho knelt down next to her. Hello, little one. Are you being good for Bora and Tai-Min? She nodded seriously. I helped them fix the water maker. I am good with small parts. I know you are. Deho touched her head gently. Her hair was soft and silver like her eyes. I have to go to a meeting now, but I will come see you later, okay? Promise? She asked, looking at him with those eyes that seemed to see too much. Promise, he said, and meant it. Conference Room A was full of worried faces when Deho arrived. Admiral Kim So-ra stood at the head of the table, looking like she had not slept in days. Around the table sat the captains of the other ships, the head doctors, the supply officers, and the engineers. The situation is getting worse. Admiral Kim began without ceremony. Food supplies will last maybe 6 more weeks if we are lucky. Water recycling is at maximum capacity and breaking down daily. We are carrying 837 refugees from 12 different species, and frankly, we cannot support them much longer. Dr. Yoon Haijin, the fleet's expert on alien biology, cleared his throat. Admiral, I have been studying possible solutions. There is a system 14 light-years from here, Sigma Draconis 7th. It has breathable air and water. The surface is mostly desert, but it is habitable for most of the refugee species. What are you suggesting, Doctor? Admiral Kim asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. We drop off the refugees there. They can build new settlements. We give them what supplies we can spare, and we continue to look for a proper home for our own people. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. They would be abandoning the refugees on a harsh, empty world with minimal supplies and no protection. Captain Choi Min-soo, Daeho's old friend, spoke up. "What about the Galactic Council? Can they not help?" Dr. Yoon shook his head. "I have sent 15 messages to the Council. Their official response is that the refugee species, especially the Nari, are considered non-contributing members of galactic society. They will not provide aid." "Non-contributing," Admiral Kim repeated, and there was anger in her voice. "They mean the refugees are too peaceful to be useful in their wars." "The Nari have never fought anyone," Dr. Yoon confirmed. "They have no armies, no weapons technology. In the eyes of the Council, they are a failed species that deserves whatever happens to them." Daeho felt his hands clench into fists under the table. He thought of Kira, playing with her metal toys, calling him Hero Man. She was not a failed anything. She was a child who deserved to grow up safe and happy. "So we just leave them on a desert planet?" he asked. Admiral Kim looked at him with tired eyes. "Do you have a better idea, Captain? If we keep them, we all die together. If we give them a chance on Sigma Draconis VII, at least some of us survive." The vote was quick and quiet. 15 officers voted yes, 3 voted no. Daeho was one of the 3. 2 weeks later, the fleet arrived at Sigma Draconis VII. The planet looked like a brown and yellow marble hanging in space. Long-range scans showed desert stretches broken by small oases and mountain ranges. It was not a kind world, but it could support life. Daeho was assigned to command the refugee transport mission. He supervised the loading of supplies onto the transport ships: medical equipment, food that would last maybe 3 months, water purifiers, basic tools for building shelters. It was not nearly enough, but it was all they could spare. The refugees knew what was happening, but they did not complain. The Nari especially seemed to accept their fate with quiet dignity. They helped load their few possessions and gathered their children close. Kira found Daeho as he checked the supply lists for the 3rd time. She had something in her small hands, holding it carefully like it was made of glass. "Hero Man," she said, "I made this for you." She held out a piece of metal that had been carefully shaped and polished. It was a picture pressed into the metal surface. It showed a stick figure of a man in uniform carrying a smaller figure away from scribbly flames. At the bottom, in letters that were crooked but clear, she had written, "Thank you, Hero Man." Daeho took the metal picture, and for a moment he could not speak. His throat felt tight and his eyes stung with tears he would not let fall. "This is beautiful, Kira." "Thank you." She smiled at him, a real smile that made her silver eyes shine. "You saved me from the fire. Now I give you something to remember." "I will keep it forever," he promised. When the transport ships were loaded and ready, Daeho walked through them one last time. The refugees sat quietly in their seats, holding their children and their small bags of belongings. They trusted him to take them somewhere safe, even though he knew he was taking them to a world that might kill them. The transport ships left the fleet and headed down to the planet's surface. Through the viewports, Daeho could see the desert stretching in all directions, broken by patches of green that marked water sources. The landing site had been chosen carefully, near water, with some shelter from the wind, far from any predators the long-range scans had detected. The refugees filed off the ships with quiet dignity. The adults began immediately to organize work groups and plan their settlement. The children stayed close to their parents, looking around at this strange new world with wide eyes. Kira stood apart from the others, her small hand pressed against the hull of the transport ship. She was looking at Daeho through the viewport, and in her silver eyes he saw something that made his heart break all over again. She understood. Somehow this small child understood that he was leaving her here, that the ships would go up into the sky and not come back, that she would have to grow up in this desert place without him, without anyone who had promised to keep her safe. Their eyes met through the metal and glass. Hers asked the same question they had asked 3 months ago when her world burned. Why is this happening? This time Daeho had an answer. Because adults make hard choices and children pay the price. The transport lifted off, carrying him away from the small blue figure on the ground. As they rose higher, Kira became smaller and smaller, but she never moved from her spot. She stood there watching until the transport disappeared into the clouds, taking her hero man away forever. The first day on Sigma Draconis 7th had gone well enough. The refugees had worked together to set up temporary shelters near the water source. The Nari were skilled with their hands, and they quickly figured out how to use the human tools to build basic structures from the local rocks and metal scraps from the transport. Ship's Captain Lee Dae-ho had watched from the IR transport's bridge as the small settlement took shape. Children ran between the adults, helping carry small items and playing games that needed no language. For a few hours, it almost looked like hope. Then Lieutenant Choi Min-soo had called him to the sensor station. "Captain, you need to see this," Min-soo said, his voice tight with worry. The long-range sensors showed 3 ships entering the system. They were still far away, but their design was unmistakable. Vorthak scout vessels moving fast and direct toward Sigma Draconis 7. "How long until they arrive?" Dae-ho asked, though he already knew the answer would not be good. 18 hours, maybe 20 if we are lucky, Min-soo replied. They must have been tracking the refugee ships somehow. Maybe following heat signatures or picking up communications. Dae-ho stared at the sensor display. 3 ships meant a full scouting force. They would study the planet, count the refugees, and then call for a larger fleet to finish the job. The Vorthak did not leave loose ends. "Sir," Min-soo said quietly, "we need to leave, now. If those ships detect us here, they will call in everything they have. The transport has no weapons, no shields worth mentioning. We would not survive the first attack." Through the bridge viewports, Dae-ho could see the refugee settlement. Smoke rose from small cooking fires. People moved between the shelters, organizing supplies and planning for their first night on the new world. They had no idea that death was coming for them again. "What about the refugees?" Dae-ho asked. Min-soo's face was grim. "Sir, I am sorry, but there is nothing we can do for them. We cannot fight 3 Vorthak ships. We cannot evacuate 800 people before they arrive. And if we try, we lose the transport and all the medical supplies the fleet needs." Dae-ho knew his lieutenant was right. This was the same kind of hard choice that had brought them here in the first place. Save who you can. Leave the rest. Survive another day to fight another battle. But knowing something is right does not make it easy. "Prepare for immediate departure," Dae-ho ordered. "Signal the fleet that we are returning with enemy forces inbound." The transport's engines began their startup sequence. Below on the planet, some of the refugees looked up at the sound. They had heard these engines before when the ships had brought them here. Now the engines meant something different. Dae-ho found himself at the viewport looking down at the settlement one last time. He could see individuals moving between the shelters. Adults organizing work details. Children playing near the water. And there, standing apart from the others, a small blue figure looking up at the sky, Kira, even from this distance, even through the atmosphere and the transport's thick windows. Dae-ho felt like he could see her silver eyes. She was watching the transport, waiting to see what would happen next. "Captain," Min-soo called from his station, "we need to go. The Vorthak ships have changed course. They are moving faster now." The transport lifted higher, preparing to leave the atmosphere. Dae-ho pressed his hand against the viewport, looking down at the small figure that never moved from her watching place. "I am sorry," he whispered, knowing she could not hear him. As they broke through the atmosphere, Dae-ho got his last clear look at Sigma Draconis 7. The refugee settlement looked like a small brown spot next to the blue-green water source. 837 people trying to build new lives on a world that did not want them. And somewhere down there, a little girl who had called him Hero Man was learning that heroes sometimes leave. The jump to hyperspace took them away from the system in seconds. One moment, Sigma Draconis 7 filled the viewport. The next, there were only stars. Dae-ho stayed at the viewport for a long time after the jump, staring at the distant lights. Each star might be a sun with planets around it. Some of those planets might have people on them. People making hard choices. People leaving others behind. People trying to be heroes and failing. "Captain," Min-soo said softly, "you could not have saved them." The math was simple. 3 Vorthak ships against 1 transport with no weapons. We would have died with them, and that would not have helped anyone. "I know," Dae-ho replied. He pulled the metal picture from his pocket, the one Kira had made for him. The stick-figure hero carrying the stick-figure child away from the flames. "I know the math." But knowing the math and accepting it were different things. 2 days later, they rejoined the fleet. Admiral Kim Sora was waiting for them in the docking bay, her face set in hard lines. She had received their report about the Vorthak ships, and she understood what it meant. "How long do you think they have?" she asked without ceremony. The scouting ships will study them for a few days, Daeho reported. After that, they will call in a battle group. Standard procedure is total elimination within a week of initial contact. Admiral Kim nodded. Then they are already dead. We can only hope they do not suffer too long. She turned to leave, then paused. Captain, you did the right thing. I know it does not feel that way, but you saved this transport and its supplies. That might make the difference between the fleet surviving or dying. After the Admiral left, Daeho went to his quarters. They were small and simple, but they were private. He sat on his narrow bed and held Kira's metal picture in both hands. The stick figure hero in the picture looked happy. His arms were wrapped around the stick figure child, carrying her to safety. The flames behind them looked harmless, more like decoration than danger, but real life was not like the picture. Real heroes did not always save everyone. Sometimes they had to choose who lived and who died. Sometimes they had to leave children behind on desert planets with enemy ships coming to kill them. Daeho set the picture on his small desk where he could see it every day. It would remind him of the weight of command, the price of survival, the cost of being called a hero. 3 days later, long-range communications picked up distress signals from Sigma Draconis 7. The messages were brief and desperate. Vorthak ground forces had landed. The refugees were under attack. They were requesting immediate assistance from any friendly ships. The messages stopped after 6 hours. The fleet held a memorial service a week later. 837 names were read aloud in the main assembly hall. Each name represented a life that had trusted human beings to keep them safe. Each name represented a promise that had been broken. When they read the children's names, Daeho closed his eyes. He waited for Kira's name, dreading it and needing to hear it at the same time. But when her name came, Kira, age 2 years, Nari civilian, he felt something more than sadness. He felt anger, not at the Vorthak, who were just following their nature, not at Admiral Kim, who had made the only choice she could, not even at the universe, which seemed designed to hurt the innocent. He felt anger at himself. For leaving, for giving up, for accepting that some people could not be saved. That night, alone in his quarters, Daeho made a decision. He took Kira's metal picture and held it up to the light. The stick figure hero looked back at him with simple, confident lines. No doubt, no fear, no math about who could be saved and who had to be left behind. I will do better next time, he promised the picture. I will find a way. He did not know if he would get a next time. He did not know if the universe would give him another chance to be the hero a child thought he was. But if it did, he would be ready. 2 weeks had passed since the memorial service, but Captain Lee Daeho had not slept properly since. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Kira's face looking up at him through the transport window. Her silver eyes asked the same question over and over. Why did you leave me? He tried to focus on his duties. The fleet had found a promising system with 3 habitable planets, and everyone was busy with surveys and colonization plans. The refugee crisis was over, Admiral Kim So-ra had declared. They could now focus on building a proper home for humanity, but Daeho could not focus on anything. He walked through the ship like a ghost, doing his job automatically while his mind stayed fixed on a small figure standing alone on a desert planet, watching the sky for ships that would never come back. The breaking point came during a routine staff meeting. Dr. Yoon Hae-jin was presenting his report on planetary resources when he mentioned something that made Daeho's blood freeze. The Vorthak seemed to be expanding their territory rapidly, Dr. Yoon said, pointing to a star map. Intelligence reports suggest they have established permanent bases on 17 systems in the past month, including Sigma Draconis 7. Daeho stood up so fast his chair fell over. What did you say about Sigma Draconis? Dr. Yoon looked confused. The Vorthak have established a base there. Standard occupation protocol. They are using it as a staging area for further expansion. What about survivors? Daeho asked, his voice tight. Survivors? Dr. Yoon shook his head. Captain, you know the Vorthak do not leave survivors. The planet has been completely cleansed according to our intelligence reports. But something in Dr. Yoon's voice made Daeho think the doctor was not completely certain. There was a small hesitation, a tiny doubt that most people would not notice. After the meeting, Daeho cornered Dr. Yoon in the corridor. You said the planet was cleansed. Are you sure? Dr. Yoon looked around to make sure no one was listening. Officially, yes. The Vorthak reported total elimination of hostile elements, but... He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. But what? Daeho pressed. There were some strange readings in the intelligence data. Thermal signatures in places where there should be nothing. Small energy outputs that might be power generators. The kind you might see if people were hiding in caves or underground shelters. Daeho felt his heart start beating faster. How small? Very small. Maybe a few dozen people at most. Could be sensor errors or maybe some kind of geological activity. The intelligence analysts dismissed it as irrelevant. That night, Daeho sat in his quarters staring at Kira's metal picture. The stick figure hero looked back at him with his simple, confident smile. Heroes did not dismiss thermal readings as irrelevant when children might be involved. He activated his personal computer and began accessing intelligence reports. Officially, he did not have clearance for this kind of information. But Daeho had friends in the intelligence department, and 15 years of military service had taught him how to find information that was not supposed to be found. The reports on Sigma Draconis 7th were detailed and brutal. The Vorthak had landed a full occupation force 6 days after the transport had left. They had used standard cleansing protocols, orbital bombardment of any structures, followed by ground sweeps with energy weapons to eliminate any survivors. But buried in the technical data, Daeho found what Dr. Yoon had mentioned: small thermal signatures in the planet's natural cave systems, energy readings that suggested basic power generation, and most interesting of all, trace atmospheric changes that might indicate air recycling systems working at minimum levels. Someone was alive down there. Maybe not many, maybe not for much longer, but someone was fighting to survive. The next morning, Daeho went to see Sergeant Nam Junho in the engineering section. Junho was working on a water recycler, his hands covered in grease and his face focused on the complex machinery. "I need a favor," Daeho said without ceremony. Junho looked up from his work. "What kind of favor, Captain?" "The kind that could get us both court-martialed." Junho set down his tools and gave Daeho his full attention. "I am listening." Daeho showed him the intelligence reports and explained what he suspected. Junho read through the data carefully, his expression growing more serious with each page. "You want to steal a ship and go back to Sigma Draconis?" Junho said finally. "I want to borrow a ship and go check on some friends." Daeho corrected. "The Admiral will never approve this mission. That is why I am not asking the Admiral." Junho was quiet for a long time, thinking. Then he smiled grimly. "When do we leave?" They chose the UES Swift Current, a small reconnaissance ship designed for stealth missions. It had advanced sensor equipment, a cloaking device, and just enough space for a rescue operation if they found anyone to rescue. Getting the ship without authorization required careful timing and several small lies to the dock crew. Daeho filed a flight plan for a routine patrol of the outer system. Junho made sure the ship's supplies were fully stocked, including medical equipment and emergency rations. They launched during the night shift when fewer people were paying attention to routine patrol missions. Once they were clear of the fleet, Daeho changed course for Sigma Draconis VII. The journey took 5 days at maximum speed. 5 days of wondering if they were risking their careers for nothing. 5 days of hoping that somewhere on a desert planet, people were still fighting to stay alive. When they arrived at Sigma Draconis VII, the first thing they saw was the Vorthak presence. 3 massive warships hung in orbit around the planet, their dark hulls bristling with weapons. The planet's surface showed the scars of orbital bombardment, brown patches where the refugee settlement had been, new craters where the water sources used to be. "There," Junho said, pointing at the sensor display. "Same thermal signatures as in the intelligence reports. Someone is still alive in those cave systems." Using the Swift Current's cloaking device, they approached the planet carefully. The Vorthak ships did not detect them, but Daeho knew they were taking a huge risk. If the cloak failed, if they made too much noise, if they got too close to the orbital patrols, they would die quickly and pointlessly. They landed near the cave systems in the planet's largest mountain range. The Swift Current settled into a narrow canyon that hid it from orbital observation. Outside, the desert was harsh and empty, broken by rock formations that looked like ancient monuments to nothing. But their sensors showed life signs in the caves below. Weak life signs, but definitely there. The cave entrance was hidden behind fallen rocks that had been carefully arranged to look natural. Daeho and Junho moved the stones aside and squeezed through the opening. Inside, the caves were dark and cold. The air smelled stale and recycled. Deeper in the cave system, they could hear the quiet hum of jury-rigged life support equipment working at minimum power. They found the survivors in the deepest part of the caves, as far from the surface as they could get. 43 people, mostly Nari but some humans and other species too. They were thin and weak. Living on water they filtered from underground streams, and food they grew in small hydroponic gardens powered by handmade solar collectors. When Daeho and Junho entered the main cave, the survivors looked at them with eyes that had seen too much death. They did not speak, did not move. They just waited to see if these new strangers would help them or hurt them. And there, sitting in the back of the cave next to the water recyclers, was a small blue figure working with tiny metal parts, Kira. She had grown in the past few weeks, but she was much too thin. Her silver eyes seemed too large for her face, and her blue skin was pale from living in darkness. But she was alive. She was working. She was surviving. When she saw Daeho, she stopped working and stared at him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then very quietly she said one word, "Hero man?" It was not the joyful recognition he had hoped for. It was a question full of doubt and old hurt. She had learned not to trust too quickly. She had learned that heroes sometimes leave. Daeho knelt down in front of her, close enough to touch but not touching. "Hello, Kira, I came back. Why?" she asked. Such a simple question, but it carried so much weight. "Because I promised I would take care of you," Daeho said. "And heroes do not break their promises." She looked at him with those silver eyes that saw too much, studying his face like she was trying to decide if she could trust him again. Then, very slowly, she reached out and took his hand. The swift current was not built to carry 43 passengers. Captain Lee Daeho and Sergeant Nam Junho had hoped to find maybe a dozen survivors, not nearly 50 people living in the deep caves of Sigma Draconis 7th. "We can make 3 trips," Junho said, studying the ship's passenger capacity. "Take the most critical cases first, the injured, the very young, the very old." Daeho looked around the cave at the survivors. They had heard Junho's words, and he could see the fear in their eyes. They understood what 3 trips meant. It meant some people would have to wait. It meant some people might be left behind if something went wrong. "No," Daeho said firmly. "We take everyone now, or we do not take anyone. Captain, the ship cannot handle that many people safely. The life support will fail, the power systems will overload. Then we get help." Daeho activated his communicator and began broadcasting on all human frequencies. "This is Captain Lee Daeho of the UES Swift Current, broadcasting from Sigma Draconis 7. I am with 43 survivors of the Vorthak cleansing operation. We are under immediate threat from orbital forces. Any human vessel receiving this message, we need immediate assistance." Junho stared at him. "Captain, you just revealed our position to every Vorthak ship in the system, and you probably just ended both our careers." "Good," Daeho said. "I was getting tired of making the safe choice." The first response came within an hour. It was from Captain Yu Min Jung of the merchant vessel Lucky Strike, operating 2 systems away. "Swift Current, this is Lucky Strike. We are changing course to assist. 18 hours.
Can you hold that long?"
More messages followed. Independent traders, small patrol ships, even a passenger liner that was supposed to be heading to the outer colonies. Word spread through human space like wildfire. There were survivors on Sigma Draconis 7, and one crazy captain was trying to save them all. The Vorthak Orbital Patrol noticed the increased radio traffic within 6 hours. Their ships began moving toward the planet's surface, launching scout fighters to investigate the source of the transmissions. "Time to go," Junho said, watching the sensor displays. "Those fighters will find us in 20 minutes and we cannot fight them." But Daeho was not ready to leave. "Load everyone into the Swift Current. Pack them in like cargo if you have to. We are not leaving anyone behind." The survivors moved quickly but quietly, helping each other into the small scout ship. Adults carried children, and the children carried the few possessions they had managed to save. Kira stayed close to Daeho, her small hand holding tight to his uniform sleeve. With 43 extra people, the Swift Current was dangerously overloaded. The engines strained to lift off, and the life support systems immediately began showing red warning lights. They had maybe 4 hours of breathable air if nothing else went wrong. They made it out of the cave system just as the first Vorthak fighters arrived at their old position. The Swift Current's cloaking device hid them from the enemy sensors, but it also used enormous amounts of power. Power they needed for life support. Cloak or life support, Junho said grimly. We cannot have both. Life support, Daeho decided. If we are going to die, we die fighting, not hiding. The Swift Current dropped its cloak and accelerated away from the planet as fast as its overloaded engines could manage. Behind them, Vorthak fighters gave chase, their weapons charging for attack runs. That was when the Lucky Strike dropped out of hyperspace. Captain Yu Min-jung's merchant vessel was not a warship, but it was big and tough, built to survive asteroid impacts and pirate attacks. It immediately positioned itself between the Swift Current and the pursuing fighters, launching defensive drones and electronic countermeasures. Swift Current, this is Lucky Strike, came Min-jung's voice over the radio. We have you covered. Get those people to safety. More ships arrived over the next hour. The cargo hauler Strong Wind, the passenger liner Bright Future, 2 patrol boats from the outer settlements, then a full squadron of fighters from the mining station at Wolf 359. The Vorthak had expected to deal with one small scout ship. Instead, they found themselves facing an impromptu human fleet that had gathered from across 3 systems. Ships that had changed course, abandoned cargo runs, and left paying passengers at stations, all to help save 43 refugees they had never met. The battle was brief and one-sided. Human ships were not individually superior to Vorthak vessels, but they fought with a coordination and determination that the enemy had not expected. They used merchant ships as shields, fighters as spears, and passenger liners as mobile hospitals. When Admiral Kim So-ra arrived with half the official fleet, the Vorthak forces were already retreating. She found nearly 24 human ships in orbit around Sigma Draconis 7th. Their crews working together to provide medical aid and temporary shelter for the rescued survivors. Daeho expected to be arrested immediately. He had stolen a ship, disobeyed direct orders, and started what amounted to an unauthorized military operation. Instead, Admiral Kim just looked tired. Captain, she said when she boarded the Lucky Strike where the survivors were being treated, do you have any idea how many regulations you have broken? Several hundred, I would guess, Admiral. Several thousand, actually. I have been getting angry calls from Fleet Command for the past 6 hours. She paused, looking around at the survivors receiving medical treatment. They are demanding your court-martial. Daeho nodded. He had expected this. I understand, Admiral. I am ready to face the consequences. Good, Admiral Kim said, because I told Fleet Command that if they want to court-martial the captain who saved 43 lives, they will have to court-martial me too. And Captain Min-jung. And Captain Lee from Strong Wind, and about 15 other captains who seemed to have accidentally violated their orders to help with your unauthorized rescue mission. Daeho stared at her. Admiral? It seems there was a communication error, Admiral Kim said with the faintest trace of a smile. All those captains thought they were responding to an official distress call. Very confusing situation. These things happen in wartime. Later, as the fleet prepared to leave Sigma Draconis 7, Daeho found Kira in the temporary refugee quarters on the Lucky Strike. She was sitting by a viewport looking out at the stars. She was clean now and properly fed and wearing clothes that actually fit her, but her silver eyes still held that old sadness. Are you going to leave again? She asked without looking away from the stars. Daeho sat down next to her. No, never again. I promise. Adults make promises they cannot keep, she said quietly. I learned that. Some adults do, Daeho admitted. But not all of us. And not me, not anymore. She finally looked at him then. Where will we go now? Wherever you want, Daeho said. The fleet has found a good system with 3 planets. You can help us choose which one to call home. Home, she repeated like it was a word in a foreign language. Yes, a real home. With schools for children and gardens where you can grow things and workshops where you can build whatever you want to build. She was quiet for a long time, thinking. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. It was another picture pressed into metal, like the one she had made before. This one showed 2 stick figures standing together looking up at stars. I made this while we were hiding in the caves, she said. It is you and me after you came back. Daeho took the picture carefully. It is beautiful. The stick figure of you looks happy, she observed. The real me is happy too. She smiled then, the first real smile he had seen from her since the rescue. Good. Heroes should be happy. 6 months later, the human fleet established its new colony on the second planet in the Kepler 438 system. They called it New Haven, and it became home to humans and refugees from a dozen species. Kira grew up there, in a house with windows that looked out on green fields instead of burning cities or empty deserts. She learned human languages and Nari history and how to build things with her hands. When she was older, she joined the colony's engineering corps and designed water systems and power plants that would never fail the people who depended on them. But she kept her 2 metal pictures on her desk, the before and after images of what it meant to be saved by someone who refused to give up. And sometimes, when new refugees arrived at New Haven, scared and hopeless and certain that no one would help them, Kira would tell them about her hero man, about the human captain who came back for her when everyone said it was impossible. She would tell them that humans were different from other species, not because they were stronger or smarter or better at fighting wars, but because when humans made a promise to protect someone, they kept it, no matter what the cost, no matter what the odds. That was what made them human, and in the end, that was what made them heroes.